A cottage on a wet Yorkshire moor. 2 names on the same death list. One secret keeper she would have chosen last in the world, and 7 weeks of candlelight and held breath between them. What happens when there is nowhere left to look but at each other? Our story begins now. The rain had a particular quality to it on the Yorkshire moors. Not the warm, theatrical downpour of London summers, but a fine grey mist that found its way into the seams of a cloak and settled there like a held breath. Hermione Granger watched it through the warded window of the Aurors carriage, her wand resting across her knees, her knuckles paler than she would have liked them to be. Kingsley Shacklebolt sat opposite her. He had not spoken in nearly an hour. "You're certain," she said finally. Her voice came out thinner than she meant it. "I'm certain. And the keeper, already in place." "Kingsley." He looked up. The lamp inside the carriage was charmed low, and his face in that amber half-light looked older than she remembered it being a month ago. The war had aged everyone differently. Kingsley wore his weariness in the lines at the corners of his mouth. "Hermione," he said, with the patience of a man who had argued this point with her 3 times already. "We intercepted a blood curse contract sold under your full name. Sold. Someone paid a great deal of gold to have you killed in a manner that cannot be reversed once initiated. I do not have the luxury of placing you somewhere convenient. I have the luxury of placing you somewhere no one will think to look. And the keeper is someone no one will think to look at either. That is the principle, yes." She turned back to the window. The moors slid past in long pewter sweeps, broken only by the dark stitching of dry stone walls. Somewhere out there was a cottage. Somewhere out there was a person who held her location inside their skull like a coin in a closed fist, and she did not know whose fist it was. She had asked 3 times. Kingsley had told her each time that she would know when the door opened. The Fidelius worked best when the protected party arrived ignorant. There could be no betrayal in transit, no information leaked under truth serum, no whisper drawn out by legitimacy. She understood the logic. She had written part of the logic herself in a paper for the department 2 winters ago. Understanding it did not stop the small, persistent tremor under her sternum. The carriage slowed. "We walk from here," Kingsley said. They stepped out into the mist. The ground was peaty and gave slightly under her boots. Heather, blackened by autumn, ran away from them on either side of a path that was barely a path, more a suggestion in the grass, the kind of trail sheep made and then forgot. Kingsley walked ahead, his wand low, his shoulders set. Hermione followed with her bag slung across her body and her left hand inside her cloak, fingers curled around the holly wand she had carried since she was 11 years old. The cottage appeared the way Fidelius' hidden places always appeared, not gradually, but as a fact. One moment there was empty moorland. The next, a low stone house with a slate roof and 2 lit windows, a chimney trailing peat smoke into the dusk, a wooden gate hanging slightly off true, and a garden gone to seed. "Here," Kingsley said. He stopped at the gate. He did not open it. "Hermione," he turned to face her. "I am about to do something you will not forgive me for quickly. I am asking you to remember when the door opens that I chose this person because I would trust them with your life. Whatever you feel, and I know what you will feel, please remember that I did not choose lightly." She stared at him. "Kingsley? He has been here 3 weeks already, under his own protective seal. He testified in closed session against the remaining Lestrange financial network. His name is on a contract not unlike yours. He has more reason than anyone alive to keep this cottage's location inside his teeth." The mist on her face went suddenly cold. "No," she said. "Hermione, no, Kingsley, no. Send me somewhere else. Send me to the Burrow. Send me to Australia. Send me to a hole in the ground. There is no one else." His voice did not rise, but it firmed. "There is no one else who is already hidden, already vetted, already under the same kind of contract. 2 Fidelius charms layered into one cottage. 2 keepers, each keeping the other. You will be the only living person who knows where he is. He will be the only living person who knows where you are. It is mathematically the safest arrangement I can offer you, and I have spent 2 weeks looking for any other." She could feel her pulse in her throat. "And he agreed. He agreed. To this. To you specifically. Yes." She closed her eyes. Behind her lids, for one unwelcome second, she saw a chandelier and a marble floor and a woman with dark hair laughing. She opened her eyes again very quickly. Kingsley raised his wand. He spoke, low, the words of the charm transfer, the brief ritual by which a protected party was acknowledged by the keeper's spellwork and admitted into the hidden ground. The gate, which had been slightly off-true, swung open of its own accord. A path of slate paving showed itself between 2 rows of overgrown lavender. The door of the cottage, a heavy oak thing with iron hinges, was lit from inside by the warmer yellow of lamps. "I have to go," Kingsley said. "If I stand here longer, I draw eyes. He knows you're coming. Walk to the door. He'll open it." "Kingsley. 7 weeks, Hermione. 7 weeks and the network is dismantled and the contract is void and you go home. 7 weeks." He stepped back. He inclined his head. Not a bow, exactly, but something close to one, and disapparated with a sound no louder than a candle being snuffed. She stood at their open gate. The mist clung to her hair. She could feel each individual droplet as it gathered weight and slid down the side of her neck and into the collar of her cloak. The cottage waited. The path waited. Her own feet treacherously waited. She thought with a clarity that surprised her. I could turn around. I could walk back across the moor until I found a road, and I could flag down a Muggle lorry, and I could disappear into a country that doesn't know me, and I would die in a month, but I would die under my own steerage. She thought immediately after, don't be a child. She walked. The lavender brushed her knees as she passed it, releasing its dry winter scent. Not the summer sweetness, but something thinner and more medicinal, almost camphorous. The slate was slick. Her boots made no sound on it. At the door, she lifted her hand to knock and found that the door was already opening. He stood in the threshold. He was thinner than she remembered. The light behind him caught in his hair and turned it almost white at the crown, fading to the colour of old parchment at the ends. He wore black, not the well-cut wizarding black of his school years, but a plain woolen jumper, sleeves pushed to the forearms, and dark trousers. His feet were bare on the flagstones. There was a smudge of something, ink perhaps, or soot. on the inside of his left wrist. He looked at her the way a man looks at a sentence he has been dreading reading aloud. Granger. Malfoy. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The mist drifted past her shoulders and into the warm air of the cottage and dissolved. "You knew," she said. It was not a question. It came out flat. "I knew. You agreed to this. I agreed." "Why?" The muscle in his jaw moved once. He looked past her, out at the moor, at the spot where Kingsley had been standing, and was no longer. His eyes, grey, lighter than the mist, came back to her face and stayed there with a careful, deliberate steadiness, as if holding her gaze were a discipline he had been practicing. "Because the alternative," he said, "was you somewhere I couldn't see, and I have spent the last 2 years trying very hard not to add your name to the list of things I have failed to keep alive." She had not expected that. She had expected a sneer, a drawl, a barbed civility she could push against. She had not expected a sentence delivered low and even, without ornament, without the old curl of his mouth. She had not expected the words "keep alive." She had not expected them at all. Something in her ribs did a small, treacherous lurch. "Don't," she said, before she could think. He blinked. "Don't what?" "Don't be kind. To me, don't start with kindness. I don't." She drew a breath. The damp air burned cold in her chest. "I cannot be in this house with you for 7 weeks if you are going to be kind to me, Malfoy. I would rather you were yourself." He looked at her for another long moment. The lamp behind him guttered slightly in some draught she could not feel. When he spoke, his voice was drier, closer to the voice she remembered, but only by deliberate effort, as if he were laying it back over himself the way one might pull on an old coat that no longer fit. "Very well, Granger. Come in then. Stand on the mat. Don't track Pete onto the rug. There is tea in the kitchen if you can be civil to a kettle. Your room is at the top of the stairs on the right. Mine is on the left. I will not be entering yours, and I will thank you not to enter mine. There is a bathroom between them. The cottage has rules, and I have written them down because I had a great deal of time and very little to do. You will read them. You will not negotiate them. Are we clear?" "Crystal." "Good." He stepped back to let her in. She crossed the threshold. The cottage smelled of peat smoke and old books and something faintly herbal, rosemary perhaps, hung to dry somewhere out of sight. The flagstones under her boots were warm. He shut the door behind her with both hands, slowly, with the care of a man closing something that mattered. He did not look at her as he passed her on his way to the stairs. She stood on the mat. She did not take off her cloak. She listened to him climb, bare feet on old wood, the 3rd stair creaking, then the 5th, and to a door closing somewhere above her with the soft, definite click of a latch. Her own breath sounded very loud in the quiet. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling very slightly at the fingertips. She closed them into fists and opened them again. She did this twice. Then she walked into the small kitchen where a kettle sat already filled on a black iron range, and where, on the scrubbed pine table, a single sheet of parchment had been left for her, weighted at its corner by a smooth grey stone from the garden. She did not read it. Not yet. She set her bag on a chair. She stood with her palms flat on the table, and she stared at the grain of the wood until it stopped swimming. Upstairs, very softly, she heard him cough once. and then nothing at all for a long time, as if the house above her had decided to hold its breath. Outside, the mist thickened against the windows, and the moor went on with its slow grey weeping into the dusk. She did not sleep well. The bed was decent, a narrow iron frame with a quilt that smelled of cedar and some older, sweeter herb she could not name. And the linen was clean, and the pillow held its shape. None of that mattered. What mattered was the inch of dark wood between her door and the door frame, and the inch of dark wood between his door and the same hallway, and the silent breathing weight of another human being on the other side of a wall she had not chosen. She lay on her back. She watched the ceiling beam above her resolve out of the dark as her eyes adjusted. She catalogued sounds, the settling of stone, the kettle below, cooling, a bird very far off, that was not a bird she knew the name of, no footsteps, no movement from the other room. He might have been a corpse over there for all the noise he made. He might have been sitting upright on the edge of his own bed, staring at his own ceiling beam, doing exactly what she was doing. She did not know which of the two was the more disturbing possibility. When the grey of pre-dawn began to bleed through the curtain, she gave up. She dressed in the half-light, wool stockings, a long skirt, a high-necked jumper the colour of moss, and braided her hair tightly enough that it pulled at her temples. She wanted the pull. She wanted something on her body to feel deliberate. She picked up the parchment she had carried up from the kitchen the night before and read it for the third time at the window, where the light was better. His handwriting had changed. That was the first thing she noticed, and the noticing irritated her, because she had not been aware she remembered his handwriting well enough to know it had changed. The looping arrogance of his school essays was gone. What he wrote now was small, upright, almost cramped, as if he were trying to take up less of the page than he was entitled to. Cottage articles. 1. The kitchen is shared. I cook from 6 until 7 in the evening. You may have the kitchen at any other hour. If you intend to be in it during my hour, say so the night before, and I will adjust. 2. The bathroom between our rooms is shared. I bathe at night. You may have it at any other time. The door has a bolt. Use it. 3. The sitting room is shared. The fire is shared. If one of us is in it and the other arrives, the arriving party may stay or leave. Neither is owed an explanation. 4. The garden is shared. The gate is not to be opened. Not by either of us. Not for any reason short of the cottage being on fire, and even then I would prefer you put a fire out first. 5. There is an owl. Her name is Halla. She brings post twice a week. Post is screened before it arrives. Do not attempt to send any of your own without warning me first. The wards do not like surprises. 6. I will not enter your room. You will not enter mine. 7. We do not have to speak. We do not have to eat together. We do not have to pretend. We have, however, to be civil. I will be civil. I expect the same. 8. If you need something I have not anticipated, write it on the slate by the kitchen door. I will see it. I will respond on the slate. This is not avoidance. This is, in my experience, the way two strangers live in one house without killing each other. D.M. She read it through. She set it down on the windowsill. She looked at it for another long moment, and then she picked up the quill that had been left, very precisely, in a holder on the chest of drawers. He had thought of everything, the bastard. And at the bottom of the parchment, under his initials, she wrote in her own hand, "Acceptable. H.G." It was not a treaty. It was the bones of one. She found, to her surprise, that she was relieved to have bones. She went downstairs barefoot, carrying her boots, because the third stair creaked and she did not want to wake him. The kitchen was empty. The kettle had been refilled. There was a fresh half-loaf on the board under a linen cloth, and a small dish of butter, and a jar of honey the colour of dark amber that she did not recognize, and did not, on principle, intend to ask about. She ate standing up at the window. The moor outside was the colour of wet slate, going pale at the eastern edge. Somewhere in the lavender, a thrush was making a small repetitive complaint about the weather. She drank her tea black because she could not find the milk and would not look for it. She washed her cup. She dried it. She put it back exactly where she had found it. She did not see him until the middle of the afternoon. She had taken a book from the shelf in the sitting room, a volume of comparative ward theory of all things, which had startled her by being both present and well-thumbed, and had installed herself in the window seat with the quilt from the back of the armchair across her knees. She heard him on the stairs before she saw him. The third stair, the fifth. He came into the sitting room with the careful, neutral footfall of a man crossing a room he expected to find occupied, and stopped when he saw her, and did not pretend he had not stopped. "Granger." "Malfoy." He was holding a mug. He looked at the armchair by the fire, which was the chair he had clearly intended to take, and then he looked at the door, and she watched him weigh, visibly, briefly, whether the rules he had written entitled him to stay. "Sit," she said. It came out more clipped than she meant. "It's your chair, Article 3. He inclined his head. He sat. He arranged himself in the chair with the particular economy of a man who had taught himself not to take up space, and he opened the book that had been resting face down on the arm. She could not see the title, and he began, with every appearance of absorption, to read. She tried to read also. She read the same paragraph 4 times. The words were the principle of layered concealment relies upon, and after the 4th attempt, she gave up and looked sidelong at him. He had not turned a page either. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the page, but the page was not moving, and his hand on the arm of the chair was very still, and the knuckles of his hand were the bleached colour of river stones. "Malfoy. Granger. This isn't going to work if we both pretend to read." A pause. He turned a page deliberately, as if to spite her observation. Then he closed the book on his finger and looked up. "What would you suggest?" "I don't know." She set her own book aside. "Conversation, perhaps, like adults." "About what?" "I don't know that either. The weather." "It's raining." "Yes." "There. We have had a conversation about the weather. Shall we go back to pretending to read?" A laugh came out of her before she could stop it. It was a short, dry, surprised laugh, more an exhalation than anything, and she put her hand to her mouth as if to catch it back. His eyes, when she looked at him, had narrowed very slightly, and at the corner of his mouth there was the smallest possible movement, gone again before she could decide whether she had seen it. "All right," she said. "All right. Fine. Then tell me one thing. Just one, so that I am not living with a stranger for 7 weeks. He considered her. He set the book down on the arm of the chair. He folded his hands in his lap, the way she had seen him do at his trial, when he had been required to keep them visible at all times, and the gesture had stayed with him afterwards. "One thing," he said. "One thing. Then you also. Then I also." He looked into the fire. The peat had burned down to a low red lattice, and the light of it moved on the underside of his jaw and along the line of his throat. When he spoke, he did not look at her. "I have not lived in the manor since the trial," he said. "I have not slept under that roof. I have not crossed the threshold. The house is shut. The portraits are covered. I sent my mother to France, and I have not been back to see her because the flu is monitored and the owls are monitored. And I have, in the language of the Aurors office, been encouraged to remain out of public sight until the network is broken. This cottage is the 4th place I have lived in, 2 years. It is the first one I have not wanted to leave by the end of the week." He stopped. He did not elaborate. He did not look at her. She found, after a moment, that her own throat had closed slightly. "Your turn," he said. She looked at her hands. "I have not been able to read for pleasure," she said, "since the war. I read for work. I read for cases. I read briefs and statutes and intercepts. The book on my lap is the first book I have opened in 18 months that nobody asked me to open. I picked it up off your shelf because the spine was cracked in the right place, and I wanted to know what kind of man cracks the spine of a book on ward theory." He looked at her then, quickly, as if he had not meant to. "And," he said, "I haven't decided." The fire shifted. A piece of peat fell forward against the iron and sent up a small, soft constellation of sparks. Neither of them moved for it. Neither of them looked away. "Granger." "Yes. This isn't going to work either." "No," she said. "Probably not." She picked up her book. He picked up his. They read, or pretended to, until the light failed at the window, and he rose without a word to light the lamps. And when he passed behind her chair to reach the second lamp, she felt the brief warmth of him against her shoulder. Not touching, not nearly touching, only the displacement of air a body makes when it moves close to another body. And she did not turn her head, and he did not pause, and the lamp caught with a small clean sound, and the room came up around them in honey-coloured light, and neither of them said anything at all for a very long time. The dream came on the 4th night. She had thought she was past it. She had not had it in 9 months, not since the spring, when she had finally given in and gone to a mind healer in a quiet office above an apothecary in Diagon Alley, and had spent 6 sessions speaking, in a voice that did not sound like hers, about a drawing room and a chandelier and a knife, and the smell of a marble floor too cold against the side of her face. The healer had been good. The dreams had thinned. She had stopped sleeping with a wand under her pillow. She had begun, tentatively, to consider herself a person who had survived a thing, rather than a person still inside the thing. The cottage undid all of it in 4 nights. She did not know why. She was safer here than she had been in months. The wards were so dense she could feel them when she walked too close to the garden wall. A faint pressure against her teeth, like the air before a storm. There was no one in the house who wished her harm. The man on the other side of the wall had written down, in his cramped, careful hand, that he would not enter her room, and she believed him. She believed him with a completeness that surprised her, and the believing itself was perhaps the thing. Some part of her, some animal part that had been holding its breath for 2 years, had set the breath down upon arrival, and the body had taken the lowered guard as permission to remember. She remembered. In the dream, she was on the floor. The floor was very cold. There was a woman above her with dark hair and a laugh like cracked glass, and the woman was saying her name, saying it carefully, savouring it, the way one might pronounce the name of a wine. And there was a knife, and there was a word being carved into her forearm letter by patient letter. And Hermione, in the dream, could not move her hand to stop it, because someone was holding her wrist. Someone whose hand was not gentle and not cruel, only present, only fixed there, only making sure she could not pull away. She did not look up to see whose hand it was. In the dream, she never looked up. In the dream, she only ever looked at the chandelier above her and counted the crystals on it, because counting was the only thing she had left. She woke with a sound she did not recognize as her own. It was not a scream. It was lower than a scream. A torn, open vowel, ragged at the edges, the noise an animal makes when a trap closes. She was sitting upright before she was awake. Her hand was already at the place under her pillow where the wand was. Her other hand was at her forearm, gripping it so hard through the sleeve of her nightdress that she would find bruises there in the morning shaped like her own fingertips. She could not breathe. She tried. She tried the breathing the healer had taught her. 4 in, hold for 7, 8 out. And the count broke on the second pass, and she gulped at the air like a swimmer who had misjudged the wave. Her chest would not open. The room was too small. The room was too dark. The room was... There was a sound at her door, not a knock. A single soft sound, almost not a sound. The very deliberate placement of a knuckle against wood. And then nothing. No second knock, no voice. Only the listening pause of a person waiting to be told whether to exist. She could not speak. She could not have spoken if her life had depended on it. Her throat had gone glassy. After a long moment, she heard him move away from the door. She did not hear him return to his own room. She heard, instead, the faint creak of the 3rd stair, going down, and then a longer silence. And then, very far below her in the kitchen, the small, clean clink of a kettle being lifted off its hook. She put her face in her hands. She did not weep. She had not wept in front of anything, including herself, in a long time, and she would not begin now, in a stone cottage on a moor, with that man in the kitchen below her boiling water, as if he had any right to know that she had nightmares. The mere fact of his having heard her was a violation she would deal with in the morning. The mere fact of his kettle was an intimacy she had not consented to. She pressed her palms hard against her eyes until the dark behind her lids went red, and then white, and then dark again. And she breathed, and after some time her breath came. She did not go down. She lay back. She listened. She heard the kettle whistle very softly. He had charmed it, she realized, to whistle only just loud enough to be heard by the person standing next to it, so that it would not wake her further. And she heard the small domestic sounds of a man making tea in a kitchen at 3 in the morning. She heard him climb back up the stairs. She heard him stop outside her door. He did not knock again. She heard the smallest possible sound, the soft set of china against stone, and then his footsteps going away to his own door, and the soft click of his latch, and nothing. She lay in the dark for a long time before she got up. The cup was on the flagstone outside her door. It was a heavy earthenware mug, glazed the colour of river clay. The tea inside it was still warm. There was no note, there was no saucer. There was only the cup, set down with care, far enough from the threshold that she would not knock it over if she opened the door without looking. She carried it back into her room. She sat on the edge of the bed with the mug in her hands. She did not drink at once. She held it, and she let the heat go into her palms, and she found that her hands had begun to shake again, not from fear this time, but from something else, something she did not have the vocabulary for at 4 o'clock in the morning in a borrowed nightdress on a moor. She drank. The tea was strong and over-steeped, and someone had put honey in it, the dark amber honey from the jar she had not asked about. It tasted of heather and of something faintly smoky, and of a kindness she had not asked for and could not, in the dark, refuse. She did not sleep again that night, but she did not weep either, and by the time the grey came up at the window, she had washed the mug and dried it and set it on the chest of drawers, and decided, with the clear-eyed practicality that came to her at dawn after bad nights, that she would not mention it. Not the dream, not the cup, not any of it. He had given her the gift of doing nothing for her in any way that required acknowledgement, and she would accept the gift in the spirit in which it had been offered. She went down at 7:30. He was already in the kitchen. He was standing at the range with his back to her, in the same black jumper, his hair still damp at the nape from washing, and he was turning bread in a pan with a quiet attention that suggested he had been doing it for some minutes. He did not turn when she came in. "There's coffee," he said to the pan. "If you take coffee, I didn't know." "I take coffee." Pot on the shelf. She made her coffee. She poured it. She sat down at the scrubbed pine table, and she watched the back of his neck, which was a part of him she had never looked at in her life, and which she now found to be a normal, ordinary, vulnerable part of a person. The small hollow at the base of the skull, the place where the hair grew in 2 directions at once, the faint pinkness of skin that had been recently scrubbed. He turned the bread. He did not turn to her. "Granger." "Yes." "Toast?" "Please." He set a plate in front of her. 2 slices, golden with a dish of butter beside them, and a small pot of the dark amber honey he had not asked her about, and she had not asked him about, the lid set askew so that she would not have to wrestle with it. He sat down opposite her with his own plate. He did not look at her. He ate. She ate. They did not speak about it. They did not speak at all for several minutes, and the silence between them was different from the silence of the previous days. The previous silence had been the silence of 2 people who did not know how to be in a room together. This silence had a shape. This silence had been agreed upon. This silence said, "We will not name this, and we will both know we are not naming it, and that will be the way of it." And they kept the silence, and she ate her toast, and he drank his coffee, and the rain came on against the window in the small, persistent way it did in that country. When she stood up to wash her plate, he spoke. "Granger." "Yes." The bathroom is yours this morning. I'll take it tonight. There's hot water enough if you don't dawdle. Thank you. And she waited. He did not finish. He looked at his coffee. He turned the mug a quarter turn on the table, and then another quarter, until the handle pointed precisely away from him, and he seemed to find the handle very interesting. "And?" she said. "There's more honey," he said. "In the larder, if you want it. For your tea. In future." She stood very still at the sink with her plate in her hand. "All right," she said. "All right." She washed her plate. She dried it. She put it back exactly where she had found it. She went upstairs to the bathroom, and she closed the door, and she turned the bolt, and she stood for a long time at the small square mirror over the basin, looking at her own face, at the dark beneath her eyes, at the bruises beginning to come up on her forearm where her own hand had gripped her in the night. And she found, when she turned the tap on, that the water came out warm at once, as if someone had been running it earlier to bring the heat up the pipes, and had then turned it off and gone away and not mentioned it. She put her hand under the water. She watched her hand go pink. She did not think about anything in particular for a long while, and the not thinking was the closest thing to rest she had had in 4 nights. And downstairs, very faintly, she heard him cough once at the kitchen sink, and then begin methodically to wash the pan. The storm came in on the 11th day. She felt it in the wards before she felt it in the air, that pressure against the teeth, the small electric thrum at the back of the jaw. She was in the sitting room when it began. He was in the garden, hatless, doing something to the lavender that she had not asked about. She watched him through the streaming window. He worked with a small pair of shears, methodically, and his hair went dark in the wet, and his sleeves went heavy on his forearms. And he did not look up at the sky once, as if pretending not to notice the rain were a kind of dignity. He came in at last when the wind began to rip the smoke sideways out of the chimney. He stood on the mat in his wet jumper and dripped quietly onto the flagstones and said, without inflection, "It's going to be a few days." "How do you know?" "The hedge. The hedge. The hedge knows." She did not ask him what that meant. She had begun, in the past week, not to ask him what things meant. The cottage had its own grammar. She was learning to read it the way one learns a dialect, by listening, by waiting, by not interrupting. He was right about the hedge. The storm settled in by evening and did not lift. Rain went horizontal against the south windows. The wind made a long animal sound under the eaves. The peat in the grate hissed when a stray drop found its way down the chimney. They lit every lamp in the sitting room by mid-afternoon of the second day, because the light at the windows had gone the colour of old pewter and would not lift. By the third day, she had read every book on his shelf that interested her, and several that did not, and she had begun to pace. He noticed. He did not comment. He cooked. He cooked more than he needed to. He cooked as if cooking were a way of keeping his hands occupied so that they would not do anything else, and she watched him from the doorway one evening, the precise way he laid a knife down parallel to the edge of the board, the way he wiped his palm on the cloth at his hip before he reached for salt. And she thought, without meaning to, he learned this somewhere. He did not learn this in that house. She did not ask him where. She did not ask him anything. She had begun, by the third day of the storm, to be afraid of her own questions, because the questions she wanted to ask had stopped being safe. It happened on the fourth night. She was in the armchair by the fire. He was in the other. The wind had risen further, and the lamp in the window had gone out twice from a draught she could not locate, and he had got up the second time without a word to relight it. He had not sat down again at once. He had stood at the window for a long moment with his hand flat against the glass, as if checking the wards, or checking the weather, or checking something else entirely. When he came back to his chair, he sat down heavily, which was unlike him, and he did not pick up his book. He said, "Granger." "Yes." "May I ask you something?" She set her book down. "You may ask. I may not get an answer. You may not." He nodded. He looked at the fire. "At my trial," he said. The air in the room changed. She felt it change. She did not move. "At my trial," he said again, slower, as if testing whether the words could be made to come out at all. "You spoke for me." "I spoke at your trial. I would not say I spoke for you." "You spoke truthfully." "I always speak truthfully." "Yes." He turned the silver ring on his small finger half a turn, and then the other half, and then he stopped touching it. "You spoke truthfully, and the truth was on my side, and I have never asked you why." "You have never asked me anything, Malfoy. We have not been in a room together in 2 years." "No." A pause. "But if I had asked, would you have answered?" "I don't know." "Will you answer now?" She did not speak for a long moment. The fire shifted. She watched the red ladder of it collapse and reform. She thought of the courtroom, of the high windows, of the smell of beeswax on the bench, of the Wizengamot in their plum robes, and the boy in the dock with his hands visible at all times, and his mother in the gallery with both hands pressed against her mouth. She had been called as a witness for the prosecution. She had answered the questions she had been asked. And when she had been asked, by a clever advocate in a silver-trimmed robe, whether the accused had, on the night in question, identified her by name when he had been given every opportunity to do so, she had said no. She had said he did not. She had said it clearly, and she had said it twice, and she had not looked at the dock when she said it, because she had not trusted what her face would do. Because it was true, she said now, to the fire. He asked me what was true. I said what was true. You could have said it differently. Yes. You could have said it in a way that helped them and not me. Yes. Why didn't you? She did not answer at once. She looked at her own hand on the arm of the chair. She looked at the sleeve of her jumper, which was the moss green one, and at the cuff of it, which had ridden up 1/4 of an inch over the bone of her wrist. She did not pull the sleeve down. She let it be where it was. "Because," she said, "I watched you at the manor. I watched you when your aunt, when she was doing what she was doing. I watched your face. You stood there, and you did not raise your wand, and you did not move, and you did not look away. And what I understood in that drawing room, on that floor, was that you were not refusing to help me because you wanted me dead. You were refusing because you knew that if you moved, your mother would be next. And so I held that. I held that for 2 years. And when the clever man in the silver robe asked me if you had named me, I held it again. And I said no, because no was the true answer, and because I had decided, somewhere on that floor, that if I survived, I would not be the one who handed your mother a son in Azkaban. She did not look at him. She heard him breathe in. She heard him not breathe out for a long moment. She heard the small wet sound of his throat working, once, and then once more. Granger, don't. Granger, don't. Her voice was not loud. It was very steady and very low, and she was a little surprised by it. I did not say it for your gratitude. I said it because it was true. If you thank me, I shall be very angry, Malfoy, and I would prefer not to be angry tonight. I am tired, and it is raining, and I would prefer not to. He did not thank her. He sat very still in his chair. After a long moment, he leaned forward, slowly, and he put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He did not make a sound. His shoulders did not move. He stayed that way for what must have been a full minute, and she watched the back of his head, the bent neck, the place where the hair grew in two directions, and she felt, against every governing instinct she possessed, an impulse to put her hand on the nape of that neck. She did not. She put her hand instead on the arm of her own chair, and she pressed her palm against the wood until the pressure of it counted for something, and she waited. When he lifted his head, he did not look at her. He looked at her sleeve. The cuff had ridden up further. The pale inside of her left forearm was visible, the place where the word had been carved and where the scar had healed badly, and where the letters were still readable in the right light, raised and slightly silvered, the way burns silver when they have been there a long time. She had not meant to show it. She had not been thinking about it. She moved now to pull the sleeve down. "Don't," he said. She stopped. "Please," he said. "Don't. Not for me. Don't." He stopped. He looked at the scar. He did not look away from it. He looked at it the way one looks at a thing one has been told for years not to look at. And his face, when he looked, did not move, but the muscle along the line of his jaw moved once, and then again, and his hand on his own knee curled in very slowly until the knuckles went the bleached colour of bone. "It doesn't hurt," she said, quietly. "It hasn't hurt in a long time." "It hurts me," he said. It was the most honest sentence she had ever heard him speak. She did not answer. She could not. She watched him watch her arm, and she watched in the firelight a single thing she had not seen in a decade, a glitter at the inside edge of his eye that he did not blink away in time, and that he then, with great care, with a slight angling of his head away from her, removed against the heel of his own hand as if it had been a smut of soot. He stood up. "I am going to bed," he said. "All right." "Granger." "Yes." He did not turn. He spoke to the door. "If I had moved that night." "You did move," she said. "You moved enough. You did not name me. That was moving. It wasn't enough. It was what you had." He stood for another moment with his hand on the doorframe. He did not turn. She watched the line of his back and the small, fine tremor in the hand that gripped the wood, and the way the firelight caught at the silver ring on his little finger and threw a small, bright point of it onto the wall. "Good night, Granger." "Good night, Malfoy." He went up. She did not move from the chair. She sat with her sleeve where it had ridden up to, and the scar bare to the firelight, and she did not pull the cuff down for a long time. The storm kept on outside. The wind under the eaves made its long animal sound, and the rain hit the south window in waves, and somewhere upstairs a door closed very quietly, and then, after a longer time than she would have expected, did not open again. She put her hand over the scar at last, palm to skin, the way one covers a sleeping child, and she sat there in the firelight with her own hand on her own arm, and she breathed, and she did not move, and the fire burned down very slowly to its low red lattice, and the cottage held its breath around her, and somewhere above her the third stair did not creak, and the fifth did not creak, and the man in the room above her did not, for the rest of that long wet night, make a single sound. The storm broke on the morning of the 18th day. She woke to a quiet she did not recognize at first. The wind had gone. The long animal sound under the eaves had gone with it. What had replaced them was the small bright noise of water dropping from the gutter onto the slate path, one drop at a time, and the distant complaint of a sheep on the moor, and a thin, pale light at the curtain that had a colour she had not seen in nearly 3 weeks. She lay still for a long moment. She listened. She thought, with a faint surprise, "It is going to be a good day." And the thought was so unfamiliar that she sat up to test it against the room. The room held the thought. The room was full of a watery sunlight that picked out the grain of the floorboards and turned the cedar of the quilt the colour of warm bread. She put her feet down. The floor was cold. The cold was an ordinary cold, the cold of a stone cottage in autumn, and she found, putting her stockings on, that she was almost cheerful, which was an emotion she filed away to examine later, when she had had her coffee and could be trusted with it. He had cut the lavender. She saw it from the kitchen window. The plants along the path had been taken down to their woody bases, neat as soldiers, and the cuttings had been bundled and tied and were drying upside down from a beam in the small lean-to by the back door. He must have done it at dawn. He must have done it while she was still asleep. He must have done it, she realized, on the first morning the rain had stopped, before she could see him do it, which was very much his way of doing things. He came in from the lean-to as she was pouring her coffee. He had his sleeves pushed up. There was a long, pale scratch along the back of his left hand from a lavender stem, and there was a piece of leaf caught in his hair at the temple, and he did not know about it. He set a wooden trug down on the table. Late apples, 3 onions still in their papery skins, a small bunch of something green and feathery she did not recognize, and he washed his hands at the sink without looking at her. "Good morning," she said. He paused very slightly at the tap. "Good morning, Granger." It was the first good morning of their cohabitation. Neither of them remarked on it. She drank her coffee. He dried his hands. He turned, and the leaf in his hair caught the light, and she did something then that she had been not doing for 18 days, which was that she crossed the kitchen and lifted her hand and took the leaf out of his hair. He did not move. He did not breathe for a moment. She did not breathe either. She held the leaf between her thumb and forefinger and stepped back, and she set it on the edge of the table, and she said, more lightly than she felt, "Lavender, in your hair." "Ah, you missed a bit? I see." He looked at the leaf on the table. He looked at her hand, which was back at her side. He did not look at her face. He picked up the trug and carried it to the larder, and she heard him set it down inside, and she heard him stand for a moment in the larder with the door open, doing nothing in particular, before he came back out and shut the door behind him with a click that was a fraction too careful. "I am going to walk," she said, "in the garden, while there is light." "Yes." "Will you come?" A pause. "If you like." "I would like." She had not known she would say it until she said it. She pulled her cloak from the peg by the door and went out without waiting to see what his face did, because she did not, in that moment, want to know. The garden after rain was a different country. The lavender was gone, but the rosemary was still there, and the rosemary in wet autumn smelled like nothing else on earth, sharp and resinous and faintly sweet, the way old churches smelled in the south of France. The path was clean and dark with wet. The stones in the low wall had gone the colour of wet pewter, and the moss between them had gone the colour of new emeralds. And somewhere a robin was making the small punctilious sound robins make when they have decided a piece of ground is theirs. The sky was very high and very pale and not yet entirely blue, and the moor beyond the wall ran away to a horizon she had not seen in 18 days because the rain had been in the way of it. He came out behind her. He shut the door. He did not put on a cloak. He stood on the slate with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at the horizon the way a man looks at something he has been told he is not allowed to want. They walked. The garden was not large. 20 paces along the back wall, 10 across the bottom, 20 back along the side wall to the gate that would not open. They walked it once in silence. They walked it twice. On the third pass, she said quietly, "Tell me about the hedge." He glanced at her. "The hedge. You said it knew. The storm. You said the hedge knew." "Ah." He almost smiled. She saw the almost, the thing that was not quite a smile, but that had the shape a smile would have if he had allowed it. "My grandmother planted it. Not this one. The one at the other house. She put a charm in it, a weather sense. The leaves turn against the wind a day before the wind comes. I thought it was a children's story until I was about 14, and a storm took the roof off the south wing, and the hedge had been showing its backs for 36 hours. This one is not hers, but it's the same kind of hedge. I check it every morning." "Why didn't you say so?" "Because I was unsure whether you would think it sentimental." "Malfoy. Granger. It is sentimental. It is also useful. Both can be true." He looked at her sidelong. The thing that was almost a smile was still there. They walked on. At the bottom wall, she stopped. She put her hand on the top of the stones, because the stones were warm where the sun had touched them, and she stood for a long moment looking out across the moor at a band of light that was moving slowly across the heather, picking out one patch and then another, the way a candle picks out the page of a book one is turning. "I had forgotten," she said. "What?" "That there were colours." He did not answer that. He stood beside her at the wall with his hands still in his pockets and his shoulder not touching hers. And after a moment, she felt, rather than saw, that his head had turned slightly, and that he was looking at her, and that he was looking at her the way she had been looking at the moor, the way one looks at a thing one has been told one is not allowed to want. She did not turn her head. She knew, with a clarity that almost frightened her, that if she turned her head now, she would meet his eyes, and that if she met his eyes, she would have to decide something about her own life that she was not ready to decide on the 18th morning of a 7-week confinement on a moor. She kept her eyes on the band of light. She kept her hand on the warm stone. She did not move. After a long moment, he looked away again. She felt that too. "Granger." "Yes." "There's a piano in the room behind the kitchen. I have been..." He paused. "I have been not playing it, because the walls are thin. If you would not object, I would like to. Sometimes, in the evenings, you play badly. Then it can hardly matter if I object. It can matter to me." She turned her head then. She had not meant to. He was looking at the moor and not at her, and the light on the side of his face was the watery white gold of the first morning after rain, and there was a faint line beside his mouth she had never noticed before. Not a scar, only a place where his face had learned to fold inward, and she looked at it for a small, honest moment, and then she looked away again. "I should like it," she said, "if you played." "All right. Tonight?" "Tonight." They walked back. He held the door for her. She passed him into the warmth of the kitchen, and as she passed, she felt, for the second time, the first having been the lamp on the second evening, the brief displacement of air that comes when a body moves close to another body. And she felt also a thing she had not felt the first time, which was that he had held his breath as she passed and had let it go only when she was through the door. He played that night. He had not lied. He played badly. He played a Bach prelude in which his left hand was distinctly behind his right, and a Chopin nocturne in which he forgot the same bar twice in the same way, and a small piece she did not know which he played all the way through without a single mistake, and which she suspected, listening to it, was something he had written himself. She sat in the armchair by the fire, and she let her book lie face down on her lap, and she listened with her eyes closed, and she found that her face had gone warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. He stopped between pieces. He did not announce them. He did not look round to see if she was still there. He simply sat at the piano in the room behind the kitchen, with the door open between them, and he played the things he had been not playing for 18 days, and the cottage took the sound in the way a cottage takes the sound of rain, without judgment, without comment, only making space for it. When he stopped at last, she did not open her eyes at once. She heard him close the lid of the piano. She heard him stand. She heard him come in his bare feet to the doorway between the rooms, and she heard him stop there. She knew, without looking, that he was looking at her. "Granger," he said, very low. "Yes." "You're not asleep?" "No." "Good." He did not say good night. He did not move. After a long moment, she heard him cross the sitting room behind her chair, and she felt... She could not have said how she felt it, only that she did. The faintest brush of his hand against the top of the chair back behind her head, not on her hair, not on her shoulder, only on the wood an inch above her, the way one touches a thing to know it is real before one walks past it. And then he was past her and on the stairs, and the third stair did not creak, and the fifth did not creak, and she sat with her eyes closed in the firelight for a long time afterwards, and did not open them, because she did not yet trust her own face with what she had just heard him not say. The owl came at dawn on the 24th day. Hala was a small grey thing with one feather permanently askew on her left wing, and she announced herself by tapping at the kitchen window with the particular impatience of a creature who had flown a long way against a wind she had not approved of. Hermione was at the table with her coffee. She got up. She let the bird in. Hala shook the wet out of her feathers onto the flagstones with great dignity, and then held out her leg to be relieved of 2 scrolls, one bound in plain twine and the other sealed with the dark green wax of the Auror office. Hermione looked at the seals. She did not break them. She set the kettle back on its hook, and she sat down with the scrolls in front of her on the scrubbed pine table. And she waited, because she knew, from the weight of them and from the number of them, that this was not a letter she should open alone. He came down at 7:30. He saw the scrolls before he saw her face. He stopped on the bottom step with his hand on the newel post, and he looked at the wax, and he said, without inflection, "Both of us. Both of us. Mine first or yours. Together." He came to the table. He sat opposite her. He did not pour himself coffee. He laid his palms flat on the wood, and he nodded once, and she broke the seal on the scroll addressed to her, and across the table he broke the seal on the scroll addressed to him, and they read in silence, and the kitchen around them went very quiet, and the rain on the window, there was rain again, of course, the moor had a memory of rain that ran in the stones, became, for a moment, the loudest sound in the world. She finished first. She set the parchment down. They found 2 of the 4. Yes. He did not look up from his own. The other 2 are... I see who the other 2 are. Yes. He laid his scroll down. He did not let go of it at once. His hand stayed on the parchment, fingers spread, and the knuckles of that hand were the colour of bone, and she could see very clearly the small, fine tremor that ran along the tendon between his thumb and his forefinger, and that he was, with great concentration, refusing to let move further up his arm. Granger. Yes. The name. I see it. You know who it is. I know who it is. He did not say the name. She did not say it either. The name was a man who had been a friend of his father's. The name was a man who had stood at the back of a drawing room with his hands folded, and had not laughed, and had not flinched, and had only watched, and whose face she had seen very briefly between 2 crystals of a chandelier, and whose face she had not been able to forget. The name was on the list of those who had paid for her death. The name was also, she understood now, watching the colour go out of the face across the table from her, on a list that belonged to him. He stood up. He did it carefully, the way a man stands up who is not certain his legs will hold him, and he walked without speaking to the back door, and he opened it, and he stood in the doorway with his back to her, looking out at the rain. He did not go through. He stood with one hand on the door frame and the other at his side, and his shoulders were set in a way that she recognized from the trial, which was the set of a man holding very still, because he had been told to keep his hands visible at all times. She did not go to him. She gave him the doorway. She gave him the rain. She gave him the back of his own neck and the silence of the kitchen and the small wet sound of Hala shaking herself dry on the hearth, and after some minutes he closed the door and he came back to the table, and he sat down opposite her, and he put his hands flat on the wood again, exactly where they had been before, as if returning to the table at the precise place he had left. It were a small private rule. 6 weeks, he said. They are asking for 6 more weeks. I know. That is 13 weeks, not 7. I can count, Malfoy. Granger, I'm sorry. I know, I'm sorry. He looked at the parchment. He did not pick it up again. I am going for a walk, he said. In the garden. I will be a while. All right. Granger. I know. He went. She did not watch him go. She heard the door and the slate path under his boots, and the gate of the inner garden which he did not open because he knew the rule and which he merely leaned against. And after a moment she heard nothing at all, because the rain had thickened and the cottage was thick-walled, and he had gone to a part of the garden where she could not hear him from the kitchen, and that, she understood, was the point. She did not follow. She washed the cups. She fed Halla a strip of bacon from the larder. She read the Aurors scroll twice more, slowly, marking with her thumbnail in the margin the names she would write back about and the questions she would ask. And she found, when she had finished, that her hand was steady, and that her breath was steady, and that the part of her that had once been afraid of news of this kind had, in the past weeks, learned a different way to hold itself. She did not know when. She did not know how. She only knew that the fear was there, but that it was hers now, instead of the other way round. He did not come back at lunch. She left him a plate on the table, covered with a cloth, and she ate her own at the window, and she watched the rain. He did not come back at tea. She lit the lamps at 4. She lit the fire in the sitting room. She took the cooled plate off the table and ate the bread from it herself, because there was no point wasting bread, and she put a fresh plate on the range for him and a fresh cloth over it, and she went into the sitting room with a book she did not intend to read. He came in at 2:30 in the morning. She knew the hour because the small clock on the mantel had struck the half just before she heard the kitchen door, and she had not, in fact, gone to bed. She had been sitting in the armchair by the fire with the unread book on her lap and her cloak across her knees, telling herself, with a sternness she did not quite believe, that she was simply not yet tired. The fire had burned down twice. She had built it up twice. When she heard the kitchen door, she did not move from the chair. She heard him cross the flagstones. She heard him stop. She heard him not call out, because he would not have called out, and she heard, instead, the long, slow sound of a chair being pulled out from the kitchen table, and the soft sound of a man sitting down at it in the dark. She got up. She went barefoot. She did not take the lamp. The kitchen was lit only by the residual red of the range and by the cold blue square of moonlight through the window, because the rain had thinned at last, and there was, behind the cloud, a piece of the moon. He was sitting at the table with his elbows on it and his head in his hands. He had been in the wet. His hair was dark with it. His jumper was dark across the shoulders. He had not lit a lamp. He had not eaten the plate that was still on the range under its cloth. He had not, by the look of him, done anything for several hours, but sit in a wet garden, and then, eventually, come inside and sit in a dark kitchen and wait for whatever it was that one waits for at 2:30 in the morning when one cannot bear one's own bed. She did not speak. She crossed the kitchen. She stopped beside his chair. She did not touch him. She stood for a long moment beside him, and she watched the very fine tremor that was now in both of his hands, and that he had stopped at some point in the garden, bothering to hide. Then she sat down. Not opposite him, in her usual chair, but next to him, on the long bench against the wall, so that her hip was an inch from his elbow, and her shoulder a hand's breadth from his. And she put her own hand, palm down, on the table between them. She did not put it on his hand. She put it on the table beside his hand, near enough that he could feel the warmth of it through the wood. And she left it there, and she did not speak, and she did not move. He did not lift his head for a long time. When he did not look at her. He looked at her hand on the table. He looked at it for what felt like a long time, and she watched the side of his face in the red half-light, and saw the muscle move at the line of his jaw, and saw the throat work once. He moved his hand. He did not move it far. He moved it the small distance across the wood that separated his fingers from hers, and he laid his hand over hers, palm to the back of her hand, and his hand was cold from the garden and the rain, and his palm was rougher than she had expected, and he did not press, and he did not curl his fingers around hers. He only laid his hand over the back of her hand and left it there, as if asking, without words, whether the hand might stay. She turned her hand over. She did it slowly. She did it under his, so that he did not have to lift his hand, so that he did not have to decide anything more than he had already decided. Her palm came up against his palm. Her fingers came up between his fingers, and at the last moment, when she had drawn breath to leave it at that, his hand closed around hers. Not tightly, only completely, the way a hand closes around a thing it has been a long time without. And she felt against the soft skin at the side of her little finger the small, cool bite of the silver ring on his. He breathed out. It was the smallest possible sound. It was the sound of a man who had been holding a breath for several hours without knowing it. He did not weep. He did not speak. He bent his head forward, very slowly, until his forehead came to rest against her shoulder. Only just, only the weight of his head, only the ghost of a lean. And he stayed there, and she did not move, and she did not lift her free hand to touch his hair, although her free hand wanted very much to lift. And the kitchen around them was very quiet, and outside the window the cloud moved off the moon at last, and the moor went silver, and his hand in her hand did not let go. They did not speak about the kitchen. She had not expected that they would. She had carried him, in a manner of speaking, up the stairs at last that night. Not bodily. She could not have carried him bodily, but with the small, steady pressure of her hand still in his, drawing him up out of the chair, drawing him up the narrow stair. And at the door of his room, she had let his hand go, and he had let hers go, and neither of them had said anything, and the latch had clicked softly behind him, and that had been the end of it. The next morning, he had come down at his usual hour. He had made coffee. He had set a cup in front of her without looking at her face. He had said very evenly, "It's clearing." She had said, "Yes." He had said, "I'll be in the garden." She had said, "All right." And the day had gone on, and the next day had gone on, and the day after that, and they had not spoken about the kitchen, and they had not stopped not speaking about it either, which was a different thing entirely. The not speaking had a quality. The not speaking was a room they both lived in. He touched her now, when he passed her. He had not before. He did not do it deliberately. He did not do it as if he intended to be noticed. He did it the way long-married people do it, the brief brush of a hand against the small of her back as he reached past her for the salt, the steadying touch of 2 fingers at her elbow as she stepped over the threshold of the lean-to door, the press of his palm flat between her shoulder blades for half a second when she stopped in front of him in the corridor and he could not get past. Each touch was nothing. Each touch was a fact. She catalogued them without meaning to. She catalogued the way her own body began to lean very slightly toward the door before he came through it. She catalogued with a clinical horror that on the 31st day she had moved her chair at the kitchen table 6 inches closer to his, without remembering having done it, and that he had not moved his away. It happened on the 33rd day. She had been reading in the sitting room. He had been at the piano. The piece he was playing was the small one she suspected he had written. She was nearly sure of it now. He played it differently each time, the way one only ever plays one's own. And she had got up at some point during it without meaning to, and had gone in her stockings to the doorway between the rooms, and had stood there with her shoulder against the door frame and had watched him play. He knew she was there. She knew he knew. He did not turn his head. He played the piece all the way through, and then he played it again, more slowly, with his eyes closed, and on the second pass his left hand was not behind his right, and there was a small phrase near the end that she had not heard him play before, and she understood with a clarity that did something complicated to her chest that he was playing it for her. When he had finished, he did not lift his hands from the keys at once. He let them rest. He sat with his head slightly bent and his fingers on the keys and his shoulders very still, and after a moment he said without turning, "Granger." "Yes." "Come in or go away." Please." She came in. She crossed the small room to the piano. She stopped beside the bench. He did not look up. She watched his hands on the keys, the long fingers, the silver ring on the little one, the small fading scratch from the lavender. And she watched the breath in his shoulders, and she said, "Move over." He moved over. She sat down beside him on the bench. The bench was not wide. Her hip came against his hip, and her thigh came against his thigh through the wool of her skirt and the cloth of his trousers, and she felt the warmth of him along the whole side of her body, and she did not move away. He did not move away either. He sat very still with his hands on the keys, and after a moment he turned his head, only a fraction, only enough to bring his eyes level with the side of her face, and he looked at her. She did not look at him at once. She looked at his hands on the keys. She lifted her own hand and she set it very carefully on top of his right hand, palm to the back of his hand, the way he had done on the table at 2:30 in the morning. She let it rest there. Then she turned her face to him. He was closer than she had expected. The lamp on the top of the piano was behind her shoulder, and the light on his face was soft, and there was a fine pale shadow under his lower lash that she had never been close enough to see, and the iris of his eye, at this distance, was not the grey she had remembered. It was paler, almost silver at the rim, and darker at the centre, and she found that she had not breathed in a small measurable while. He did not move. She understood with great clarity that he would not move, that he had decided at some point in the past 2 weeks that he would not move first, ever, in any direction, for any reason, because to move first would be to ask for a thing he did not consider himself entitled to ask for. She understood that the kitchen had been the end of his asking. She understood that everything that happened after the kitchen would have to be her hand on his. Her chair moved 6 inches, her body in the doorway, her hip on the bench. She understood it the way one understands a piece of mathematics. And she understood also that she had been doing all of those things for many days without giving herself permission to know what she was doing. She gave herself permission. She leaned in. She did it slowly. She did it so slowly that he could have stopped her, and she watched his face for any small refusal, and what she saw instead was that his eyes closed before her mouth reached his. Closed the way a man closes his eyes against a light he has been waiting for in the dark, and that his breath came out shaky against her mouth in the last inch, and that when her mouth at last set against his, he made a sound very low in the throat that was not a word, and that was not for her ears, and that she heard anyway, and that she would never tell him she had heard. The kiss was not what she had expected. She had not, in fact, expected anything, because she had not, in fact, allowed herself to imagine it. What she found was that his mouth was warm, and that he kissed the way he played, slightly behind, slightly careful, then suddenly not careful at all, and that his hand had come up at some point to the side of her face, and that his thumb was at the corner of her jaw, and that he was holding her face the way one holds a thing one is afraid of dropping, and that she was holding the front of his jumper in her fist without remembering having taken hold of it. He pulled back first. He did not pull back far. He pulled back only enough to bring his forehead to hers, and he kept his hand at her jaw, and he kept his eyes closed, and he breathed against her mouth for a long moment without speaking. "Granger, don't. Granger, don't ruin it, Malfoy. Not yet. Give it a minute." "All right." He gave it a minute. The minute was very quiet. The fire in the next room was making its low sound. The piano under their hands was making the small contracting noise an instrument makes when it has been played and is going back to its own temperature. His thumb at her jaw moved once, very slightly, along the line of her cheekbone, and she felt it the way one feels the first stroke of a quill on new parchment, and she did not move. He spoke at last. "I have to write to Kingsley." "What?" "In the morning. I have to write to Kingsley and ask him to take me off the keeper bond." She drew back. She did it slowly. She drew her face back from his, and she took her hand from the front of his jumper, and she put both her hands in her lap, and she looked at him with the kind of clear, flat attention she had not turned on him since the first night. "Say that again. Granger, say it again." He did not say it again. He looked at the keys. "You're not serious." "I am perfectly serious." "You are not. Granger, listen to me. No, You listen to me." Her voice was not loud. She had never been loud in argument. She had never needed to be. You sat in a kitchen at 2:30 in the morning with my hand in your hand, and you breathed out as if you had been waiting 2 years to breathe out. And you have spent the last 11 days touching the small of my back every time you walked past me. And you have just kissed me on a piano bench as if you meant it. And now you are going to tell me, with my mouth still warm from your mouth, that you intend to write to the Minister of Magic at dawn and ask him to put someone else in this house instead of you. Is that what you are telling me? Yes. Why? He did not answer at once. He looked at the keys. He moved his hand very slightly so that one of his fingers depressed a key without weight, without sound, only the small physical fact of contact. Because I am the wrong end of your story, Granger. I shall be the judge of that. You will not. I beg your pardon. You will not be the judge of it, Granger, because you are sitting in a cottage on a moor with a man you have not been allowed to leave the company of for 33 days. And the last person you spoke to, who was not me, was a minister of magic, and the second to last was an Auror. And you have not, in any meaningful sense, chosen anything since you walked through that gate, and I will not. I will not have you wake up in 6 months in a flat in London with sunlight on a wall you actually picked, and look across a breakfast table and discover that the thing you thought you wanted was, in fact, the only thing you were given. He stopped. He was breathing harder than he had been a minute ago. His hand on the keys had not pressed any of them down enough to make a sound, but the small bones of his wrist were standing out very clearly in the lamplight. She looked at him for a long moment. She catalogued distantly the feeling that there were 3 or 4 things she could say next, and that each of them would shape the rest of her life. She felt also, very precisely, that she was not going to choose any of them. She was going to choose a 5th thing, and she did not yet know what it was, only that it was rising in her like the band of light she had seen moving across the heather on the morning the storm had broken. She stood up. She did it carefully. She did not move his hand from the keys. She walked to the doorway between the small room and the sitting room, and she stopped there, and she turned, and she said quite steadily, "You write that letter, Draco Malfoy, and I shall break every window in this cottage from the inside." And she left him sitting on the bench in the lamplight, with his hand still pressed soundless against the keys. And she went up the stairs, and the 3rd stair creaked, and the 5th stair creaked, and the door of her room did not slam, because she did not slam doors, but it closed with a small definite click that was, in its own way, the loudest sound the cottage had made in 33 days. He did not write the letter. She knew, because she did not sleep, and because she sat at the window of her room until the dawn came up grey and then pink and then a clean pale gold, and because at no point in the night did she hear the 3rd stair creak, and because at no point did Halla go out across the moor with anything on her leg. He was downstairs the whole night. She knew it the way one knows the weather without looking. When she went down at last, at 6:30, he was at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He had not changed his clothes. The lamp on the table had burned low and was beginning to gutter, and he had not got up to see to it. He looked up when she came in. He did not look away. "I did not write it," he said. "I know. I sat down to. Twice. I know." "Granger, come outside," she said. "Please, bring your cloak." He came. The morning was the kind of morning the moor produced once or twice in autumn, air so clear it felt sharpened, the heather burnt black-purple in the low sun, a single hawk drawing slow, careful rings against the pale eastern sky. She did not take him to the garden gate that would not open. She took him to the bottom wall, where she had stood on the day after the storm, and put her hand on the warm stone. And she stopped there, and she did not sit down, and she did not lean against the wall, and she did not turn to look at him at once. She drew a breath. "I have thought about what you said." "Granger, let me finish, Malfoy. I have thought about it for a whole night, and I have decided that you are wrong, and I am going to tell you why, and you are going to listen to me until I am done, and then you may say whatever you like, but you are going to listen first. Are we clear?" "We are clear." "Good." She put her hand on the top of the wall. The stone was cold this morning, not warm. It was too early in the day for the sun to have reached it. She kept her hand there anyway. "You said I have not chosen anything since I walked through that gate. You are wrong about that. I did not choose the gate. I will grant you the gate. I did not choose the cottage. I did not choose the keeper. I did not choose the 7 weeks, and I did not choose the 13 weeks they have now become. But Malfoy, listen to me. I chose to take the leaf out of your hair. I chose to ask you to walk with me in the garden. I chose to ask you to play. I chose to sit on the bench beside you, and I chose to put my hand on yours. And I chose, very specifically and with both my eyes open, to lean my face the last inch toward your face on a piano bench last night. Those were not things that were done to me. Those were things I did. Do you understand the difference? Granger, do you understand the difference?" A pause. He looked at the wall. He nodded once. "Yes." "Good." She breathed out. "Now, the other thing. The thing about the wrong end of my story." She turned to face him then. "I am 30 next year, Malfoy. I have been writing my own story since I was 11 years old, and there have been a great many people in it who other people would have chosen for me, and I have not, in fact, kept any of the ones who were chosen. I have kept the ones I chose. I am choosing you. I am telling you that I am choosing you. I am not waking up in 6 months in a flat in London discovering anything. I am standing on a moor in the cold, telling you, while I have the chance, while the words are still mine to say, that I have looked at you for 33 days, and that what I have seen is a man who carries his own weight without asking anyone else to carry it for him, and who learned somewhere to cook, and who plays the piano badly on purpose so that I will not be intimidated, and who put a cup of tea outside my door at 3 in the morning without a note, and who has not once, in 33 days, made me feel anything but safe. That is what I have seen. That is what I am choosing. Do you intend to argue with me about it?" He did not argue. He looked at her. His face did the thing it had done in the firelight on the night of the storm, the thing where the muscle of the jaw moved once and then again, and the eyes did not quite look away in time. He drew a breath. He let it out. He looked at his own hands, and then at the wall, and then at last, at her. And what was in his face when he looked at her was not the careful, neutral thing he had carried for 33 days. It was something rawer. It was something that had not had a name when he had walked out of the cottage that morning, and that had, perhaps, just been given one. Granger, yes, I do not deserve. I did not ask you what you deserve. I asked if you intended to argue with me. A long moment. No, he said, I do not intend to argue with you. Good. She stepped forward. She did it without ceremony. She closed the small distance between them at the bottom wall, and she put both her hands flat on the front of his cloak, and she looked up into his face, and she said very quietly, "Then kiss me, properly, in the daylight, where you can see what you are doing." He kissed her. He kissed her the way she had asked, in the daylight, with both of them seeing what they were doing, and this kiss was not the kiss on the piano bench. This kiss had no doubt in it. His hands came up to her face, both of them, and he held her face the way one holds the only cup of water in a long, dry country. And he kissed her slowly and completely, and without any of the careful hesitation of the night before. And she felt the cold morning air on the back of her neck, where his cloak had fallen open. And she felt the small bite of the silver ring against the line of her jaw. And she felt, somewhere under her ribs, a thing she had not felt in 2 years, and that she recognized at once, and that she had not known she was waiting for. When they came apart at last, she was a little out of breath, and so was he, and her hair had come undone on the side where his hand had been, and she did not put it back. "All right," she said. "All right. Now we are going to go inside, Malfoy, and you are going to drink a hot cup of coffee, and we are going to wait the 6 weeks they have given us, and then we are going to leave this cottage together. Are we agreed?" "We are agreed." "Good." The 6 weeks took 6 weeks. They were not, in the event, all of them difficult. There were difficult days. There were 2 more letters from Kingsley, and there was a morning in the 5th week when one of the wards on the gate flickered for no reason she could trace. And there was an afternoon when he did not come out of his room until tea time, and would not say why, and she did not ask. But the days were also full of small, ordinary things, which, in the telling, would not sound like much, and which were, in the living, the entire shape of a life. He played the piano in the evenings. She read in the window seat. They cooked together at the range, which they had not done before, and discovered that he was patient with onions, and she was patient with pastry, and that between them they could produce a passable supper. He slept, in the 7th week, with his hand against the wall that separated their rooms. She knew because she put her own hand against the same wall from the other side, and felt, through the cold plaster, the faintest warmth. And on the 9th week, he did not sleep in his room at all, and on the 10th week, he did not pretend to. The letter came on the 88th day. Kingsley wrote himself. The handwriting was unmistakable. The wax was the dark green of the Aurors office, but the message inside was short and plain, and written in his own hand, and it said only that the network had been broken, and that the 4 were now 5, and all 5 were in custody, and that the curse contract had been voided by the Wizengamot, at a closed session the previous afternoon, and that the Fidelius on the cottage would lift at noon on the following day, and that arrangements had been made, at her request, and at his, for a quiet portkey to a flat in London that she had chosen herself from a list of 3 the month before, and that he, Kingsley, was very glad, and that he hoped she would forgive him in time for the way he had begun this. She read it twice. She handed it to Draco. He read it twice also. He set it down on the table. They looked at each other across the scrubbed pine table in the kitchen of the cottage on the moor, and neither of them spoke for a long moment, and then she said, "Tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow at noon. Come with me." "Where?" "To the flat, to London, to whatever comes after the flat in London. Come with me." He did not answer at once. He looked at his hands on the table. He turned the silver ring on his little finger half a turn, and then the other half, and then he stopped touching it. He looked up at her, and the line beside his mouth, the one that was not a scar, only the place where his face had learned to fold inward, was not as deep this morning as it had been 3 months ago. She had watched it shallow. She had not said so. She did not say so now. "Yes," he said. That was all. They left the cottage at noon the next day. She had thought the night before that the leaving would be the difficult part. It was not. They walked out together through the gate that had not opened in 90 days, and the gate swung for them with the small, clean sound of a charm releasing its hold. And she did not look back at once, and neither did he. They stood at the top of the path with their bags at their feet and her hand in his hand, and the moor in front of them ran away to a horizon she had grown to know by the colour of its weather, and the sky was very high, and there was a thin wind in the heather, and the portkey, a smooth grey stone from the garden, the one that had weighted the parchment on the kitchen table on the night she had arrived, sat in her palm, warming slowly to her body. "Granger." "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" "For coming in. That first night, through the gate. You could have turned around. You very nearly did. I watched you not turn around." "I know I could have." "Why didn't you?" She thought about it. She turned the stone in her palm. She looked, for one last moment, back at the low stone house with the slate roof and the chimney that no longer smoked because they had let the fire go out at dawn, and at the cut-back lavender beginning, against all reason, to put up its first new green shoots at the base of the woody stems, and at the door, which was closed, and which would not open again until the next person who needed it was sent here by someone who knew what they were doing. "Because," she said, "I thought, when I saw your face in the doorway, that you looked like a person who needed a witness. And I thought, if I am going to be hidden away with anyone for 7 weeks, it might as well be a person who needs a witness. I did not know I needed one too." He did not answer. He lifted her hand, the one not holding the stone, and he turned it over, and he set his mouth very lightly against the inside of her wrist, against the silvered place where the letters were, and he held it there for a long moment, and then he let her hand go, and he closed his fingers around the stone with hers, and they looked at each other, and they smiled, both of them, properly in the daylight, where they could see what they were doing. The portkey took them. The cottage stayed. The flat had a window that faced east. That was the first thing she had chosen about it, when Kingsley had laid the 3 options on her desk in the 5th week and asked her, with the careful diffidence of a man who had learned not to assume anything about her wants, which of them she would like. She had chosen the one with the eastern window. She had not, at the time, been able to say why. She understood now. She had wanted to wake up to a light that came in slowly and did not arrive all at once. And she had wanted, without yet knowing she had wanted it, to wake up beside a person whose hair would catch that light the way pale parchment catches a low candle, and turn, on the pillow, the colour of warm honey. It was the morning of their first wedding anniversary. She had not, in the 1.5 years since they had left the cottage, become a person who paid much attention to dates. She had never been that person. He, as it turned out, was. He had remembered, the night before, in the small, offhand way, he remembered things that mattered to him, and had sat on her side of the dressing table, without comment, without ceremony, without a note, because they had agreed long ago that notes were not their language. A small sprig of new lavender from the pot on the kitchen windowsill, and beside it, in a chipped earthenware mug she recognized at once, a cup of strong over-steeped tea with a spoonful of the dark amber heather honey he had been ordering by post from a beekeeper in Yorkshire for nearly 2 years. She had laughed when she saw it. She had laughed in the particular way she had only ever laughed in his hearing. The short, surprised exhalation she had first made in the firelight on the 2nd day of the cottage. The laugh she had once tried to catch back behind her hand because she had not known then that it was safe to laugh in front of him. She drank the tea sitting up in bed. He was already at the window. He had pulled on his old black jumper, not the one from the cottage. That one had finally given up its elbows the previous winter, and she had refused to let him throw it away, and it now lived, folded in the bottom of her wardrobe, where he pretended not to know it was. But one very like it, with the sleeves pushed up to the same place on the same forearms, and the long pale line of him against the eastern light was a thing she had not yet, in 18 months, stopped looking at when she had the chance to look at it unobserved. "You're staring," he said, without turning. "I am." "Why?" "Because you're standing in the light." He turned. The almost smile was at the corner of his mouth, the one that had become, in the past year, only sometimes an almost smile, and sometimes the whole thing, and that she had watched with a quiet, private satisfaction deepen the line beside his mouth that had once been a place his face folded inward, and was now, increasingly, a place it folded outward. He came back to the bed. He sat on the edge of it. He took the empty mug out of her hand and set it on the floor. And he took both her hands in his, and he turned them over, palm up, the way he had taken to doing in the mornings, a small private ritual she had never asked him to explain. And he set his mouth against the inside of her left wrist, against the silvered place where the letters were, and where the letters were also, now fainter than they had been a year ago, although she did not know whether that was the wrist healing or her own way of looking at it. "Granger. I have been thinking, always dangerous, about the cottage." She opened her eyes properly. She had not been entirely awake. She was now. "What about it?" "It's standing empty," Kingsley wrote. "They have not had occasion to use it again. He asked whether we might want to take the lease on it ourselves." She was quiet for a moment. "And you said—" "I said I would ask you." She looked at him. She looked at the way the light came in over his shoulder. She thought about a stone wall and a band of light moving slowly across heather, and a piano in a room behind a kitchen, and a kettle that whistled in two tones. She thought about the leaf she had taken out of his hair on the morning the storm had broken. She thought about the hand he had laid over hers in the dark at 2:30 in the morning, and about the way he had breathed out, as if he had been waiting a very long time to breathe out and had at last been given a reason to. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes. Take the lease. Not to live in, just to keep. For weekends, for the summer, for, I don't know, for us. Granger. Yes. We could be married there, properly, in the garden. We did the registry for the ministry. We could do the other one, the one for us, in the garden, by the bottom wall. We are already married. I know. You want to marry me twice." "I want to marry you," he said, "as many times as you will let me." She looked at him. She set her hand, the one he was not holding, against the side of his face. She felt the warmth of him under her palm, and the very faint roughness of where he had not yet shaved, and the small movement of his jaw as he swallowed. And she thought, without ceremony, without surprise, only as a quiet, plain fact she had known for a long time now. "This is the man I am going to grow old beside, in an eastern-facing flat in London, and in a stone cottage on a moor in Yorkshire. And there will be days when it is difficult, and there will be days when it is not. And on all of them, on every single one of them, I will have chosen this." "All right," she said. "In the garden, by the bottom wall, in the spring, when the lavender comes back. In the spring. And Malfoy. Yes. Bring the leaf." He laughed. It was not the almost laugh. It was the whole thing. It was a sound she had heard in the past 18 months, perhaps a dozen times, and that she catalogued every time she heard it, the way she had once catalogued his touches, because she did not yet quite believe she would have an entire life in which to hear it, and she wanted, for safety's sake, to have the count of them somewhere on her person. He kissed her then, not on the wrist, on the mouth. In the light at the eastern window of a flat she had chosen herself from a list of 3 on the morning of their first wedding anniversary, with a cup of over-steeped tea cooling on the floor beside the bed, and a sprig of new lavender on the dressing table, and a stone cottage on a moor in Yorkshire, waiting, patient as a held breath, for them to come back to it in the spring. Outside, very faintly, in a London street that did not yet know what kind of morning it was going to be, a bell began to ring the hour. Neither of them counted it.
So that is the end of our story. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for staying with them. I want to tell you something honest. When I started writing this, I did not know if they would make it. I really did not. 2 people, one small cottage, so much pain between them. I sat down each day and I waited to see what they would do. And here is what I learned from them. Trust is not a big moment. Trust is small. Trust is a cup of tea outside a door at 3 in the morning. Trust is a leaf taken out of someone's hair. Trust is sitting on a piano bench and not moving away. Love does not always shout. Sometimes love is very quiet. Sometimes love is a hand on a table near another hand. Not on it, just near it, waiting. I think we forget this. I think we wait for big signs, but the real signs are small. They are always small. So if you are waiting for someone to change, or if you are the one who needs to change, please remember Draco and Hermione. They did it slowly, one day at a time, one cup of tea at a time. You can do it too. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself this week. Be kind, be patient, and if you liked this story, stay with me. There will be more. Good night.